Hi, Joe Smiles here. So today I'm going to talk to you about why I haven't eaten no food for 15 years. When I was an embryo developing in my mum's womb, I had a lapse in my development between weeks 10 and 12, and that's the weeks when your intestines form outside of your abdominal cavity and they pack up, and you have this small bowel in the center and the large bowel wraps around the small bowel, and then by week 12 it goes back into your abdominal cavity. For an unknown reason, and it's a non-genetic congenital disorder, I just stopped growing between weeks 10 and 12. When I started growing again, my bowels went back into my abdominal cavity around week 12, and then your abdomen closes over and you have the umbilicus cord coming out, and my bowels went all into the wrong place because they hadn't formed in the right position. So my small bowel was over to my right side, all packed all over here. My large bowel came up here. Instead of wrapping around here and having my appendix down here, my large bowel came up here and went back this way, and then my appendix was up here. And so when I was a baby, I used to have lots of projectile vomiting and bilious vomiting of green liquid, but no one knew what the problem was. Now normally the baby dies before it's born because as the baby starts to develop, the bowel twists because it's loose and it's in the wrong place, and it kills the baby, or the baby comes out alive, and then within days the bowel twists so much that they have to do abdominal surgery and remove the dead bowel before the baby dies. In my case, especially half of my large bowel and some of my small bowel, because it was so loose and twisting, it was loose and in the wrong place, it was twisting on and off throughout my whole life. And so as I got older and older, the twisting got worse and worse, but no one knew what was happening. But I was having extreme pain, huge amounts of vomiting. Throughout my life I used to vomit regularly, had a lot of bowel issues. I had a lot of abdominal pain, and I saw consultants and doctors, but no one seemed to know what the problem was. I was advised to have more and more fibre, but that was making the situation worse. So back in the 80s, no one really understood this condition. So then I started really going into hospital a lot between 2003, 2005, up until 2007, with extreme abdominal pain, extreme distension. On x-ray, my bowel would expand to dilate to 10 centimeters, and when parts of my bowel would, and when it gets to about 10 centimeters or 12, 15 centimeters, the bowel can split. But consultants didn't understand how after 30 hours of huge amounts of morphine and other medications to stop me vomiting, because I would keep vomiting until I couldn't vomit any more food, and then I'd vomit bile, and then I'd vomit a lot of blood because my stomach lining would just keep bleeding. Because once you start vomiting, you can't stop because your bowel goes into such a cramping and distended state that I would recover after like 5 days, and then it would take me a number of months to recover. Luckily I had a gastroenterologist consultant listen to me and believe what I was saying, and he did a CT scan. So in 2007 I had a CT scan of my bowel, and the consultants realized that my bowel was in the wrong place, so they then realized that I had malrotation. So mal is like malfunction, and rotate, it means malrotated. So my bowel was rotated in the wrong place when I was an embryo between weeks 10 and 12, when the bowel really starts to develop. And so they all apologized to me. I had another bowel obstruction and I had to stay in hospital for a couple of weeks, and I had to wait for emergency surgery whilst they decided what they were going to do. But in the end they ended up removing half of my large bowel and some of my small bowel, because when they went in they saw that my bowel was all scarred up and twisted and damaged, and it wasn't recoverable, and it was very loose. So then I was in hospital for another 2 or 3 weeks, and then they tried to start feeding me. But after my operation I kept trying to gradually eat bits of food like Rice Krispies or some light cereal, but I kept having severe bowel obstructions, which are agonizingly painful. Well, basically I had 55 bowel obstructions between 2008 and 2014. Almost all of them needed emergency hospital admissions, because they are basically emergency problems, because when your bowel obstructs itself on that severe basis, then you can die. It's quite a severe problem. They didn't know why it was happening, and so they went up inside me and stretched out the anastomosis, where they stitched my bowel back together, because they thought they'd stitched it too tightly. But I kept having more and more tests and more hospital admissions. They then wanted to do another operation and redo the surgical attachment of the bowel, and I said no. They referred me to an internationally renowned bowel hospital in London called St Mark's Hospital. I had a bowel obstruction and I went to St Mark's Hospital and I stayed there for about 2 weeks, I think. And by that time I was so exhausted and in so much pain, I refused to leave until I could get someone to help me. They decided to try gabapentin on me as an experiment, and I could self-medicate gabapentin, and it stops people from having pain. So I was on more than 3,600 milligrams of gabapentin, which is much more than the allowance that you could have. But I was on about 8 tramadol a day. I was on about 8 Imodium. I was on loads of paracetamol, loads of other types of medication. So they referred me to their head psychiatrist at St Mark's Hospital, and then I saw the head psychiatrist between 2008 and 2009. So I was trying to eat much less food. I'd lost loads of weight. I was as lean as I am now. I've always been very muscular, but so basically I had no fat to lose. I lost about, what was it, over 10 kilos of body weight. So the head psychiatrist said if I didn't stay out of hospital with my bowel obstructions, then he would see me as an inpatient in his psychiatric ward, and I'd be there indefinitely until we got to the bottom of what was causing me the psychological trauma. And he said it's his job to find out what psychological trauma I'd been through in my life in order to solve my bowel problems. And I kept saying to him, it's my job then to find out what other physiological problems I had, because I told him I had no psychological problems. And so we were at loggerheads for basically a year. And he kept writing to my doctor every month saying that I had substantial personality disorders and psychiatric problems and all kinds of issues he thought that he was trying to pigeonhole me into. And he also referred me to the hypnotherapist, and they tried to hypnotize me many times, and it wasn't working because, one, I couldn't get hypnotized, and two, I kept saying hypnotherapy is not going to solve this problem because there's other physiological problems wrong with me. Although at the time no one knew what the problems were, but I knew that I had other physiological problems. In fact, I knew from a very young age, when I was very young, that I was going to die at some point in my life because of the bowel traumas that I was having throughout my life were so severe, and no one was listening to me and no one understood. My parents or my family or doctors or consultants. I just knew I wasn't going to survive very long in my life, but it was very hard to explain that to people. And when you explain that to people, people think you're mental. After a year of psychiatric treatment, I was getting more and more tired. I was sleeping 18 hours a day. I was in constant pain pretty much 24 hours a day. I then wrote to the president of the British Society of Gastroenterology, and he said that I need to see the top doctor in the country, Professor Forbes, who was an amazing consultant. And I went to the University College London Hospital, which is one of the best hospitals in the world, and I saw Professor Forbes. So I saw Professor Forbes. He wanted to do a blood test, a full blood test, and you wouldn't believe it, but no one had even given me a full blood test in all these years, because they used to say, look at why do you look the way you do, quite fit, even though I'd lost so much weight. Consultants and doctors just don't understand that. Well, they didn't understand my psychology, that even though I was very ill, I still tried to train, because I have a saying, it's better to be ill and strong than ill and weak, and it's better to be strong and injured than to be weak and injured. So even though I was very ill and I was sleeping pretty much all day and all night and in huge amounts of pain, I still tried to train and keep myself as fit as I could, because I knew if I made myself physically robust and resilient as much as I could, it would make me mentally as resilient and tough as I could. And plus, genetically, mentally, I'm very tough and resilient person. And I have a very strong personality. So luckily those things were in my favor, but I had to drive myself forward and only rely on myself basically my whole life, and fight all these consultants and just keep pushing forward. But no one had done a blood test, and he did a MRI scan of my entire bowel, and the blood test came back that I had extremely underactive thyroid that must have been going on for years and years, because I was complaining of extreme tiredness in my 20s. No one had spotted it, and I'd been telling everyone that I was basically turning into a cretin, and the word cretin actually comes from having an underactive thyroid, because you turn cretinous. Without your thyroid, which is here, you can't function. Physically you can't function, mentally you can't function. You just stop working, basically. It causes a lot of pain and distress. And also with the MRI scan of my bowel, he saw that parts of my bowel, especially the remaining large bowel, was dilated, which he then diagnosed me with a very rare condition called chronic intestinal pseudo obstruction. It's called pseudo obstruction because your bowel obstructs itself. There's no mechanical thing in your lumen of your bowel to obstruct it. It's the nerves and the muscles of your bowel don't work. And because I was born with the malrotation, my bowel nerves were damaged and didn't work from basically when I was a fetus throughout my life. And all the trauma that had occurred to my bowel from it twisting and untwisting had damaged all my nerves. So my bowel couldn't have its normal peristalsis and move liquid, wind and food through. And so I went back to the psychiatrist as I was still seeing the psychiatrist, and Professor Forbes informed him. And of course the psychiatric treatment, psychiatrists are really, I know my Fat Loss SOS course is all about a psychology and lifestyle and mindset course, but progressive course that focuses on solutions for your present and future, and it's about changing your psychology around your lifestyle. But when it comes to psychiatrists, they still focus very much on regression therapy, looking at your past, looking at things that happened when you were a child. But life isn't like that. Many things can happen in your life where you have trauma. I didn't have any trauma. My symptoms weren't from trauma. I was born with these problems. But because they're trained like that, they pigeonhole people. If they don't understand a physiological problem, they just instantly think you've got mental health problems, which is extremely damaging to patients. And it was extremely traumatic for me to have to see this psychiatrist for a year and be told that it was all in my head when I knew it wasn't. And everyone around me started believing him and not me. So 2009, I kept trying to eat, but I couldn't. So then we basically started me on these little drinks. They're medical drinks. They're called Fortisip and Ensures. So I have 325 mils, which is about that much with 300 calories in, and then I have 200 mils with 300 calories in, and then I drink orange juice and milk. And so I saw him up until 2013 when unfortunately he retired. So then I saw another consultant in 2013. I did continue to have bowel obstructions, but much less, almost none at all, because between 2000 I still had them, but they got less and less and less as I progressively went to liquid. So 2009-10 we started 10% liquid, 90% food or very light food, still wasn't working, was going on hospital. 50% food, 50% liquid, still getting severe bowel obstructions. 20% food, 80% liquid, still getting bowel obstructions, until around 2011 we had to make a decision that I had to go full-time liquid, and it was a horrendous experience. I can only describe living off liquid for the last 15 years is like being buried alive in a box. It's enough to drive you mad, and it's horrible because food is such a massive part of everyone's life and social life and stuff like that. And so I have a letter, so to stop me having so much morphine, the maximum amounts of morphine when I have my bowel obstructions, for 30 hours, and the morphine doesn't really work because of the vomiting and I have loads of other medications for the vomiting and the pain and everything. It doesn't really work because the pain and the bowel obstructions are so severe that I have this another letter that allows me to have this drug called neostigmine injected into me, which kickstarts the peristalsis of my bowel, or tries to get it working again to move the bowel obstruction through. And I'm normally there for 5 days, but I could be there longer. But I normally discharge myself anyway, because otherwise I'll be there for weeks, because bowel obstructions are a severe problem classed as a medical emergency. So I just can recover better at home rather than being in a hospital, and I've gone through so many dozens of them that I just want to, once after 5 days I get more stable, I just want to leave. And so I then was put on a medication by another professor called Reglan, which is also called Metoclopramide. I'm on loads of medications, but I was given this drug called Metoclopramide. It blocks your dopamine and your serotonin, but I didn't really understand that at the time, and you're only meant meant to be on it for 5 days because it comes with so many neurological problems, like your whole body. It makes you sleep all the time, causes severe headaches, any neurological problem of any part of your body that you can think of, it causes neurological problems. And I was left on that drug for 9 years. I have had all kinds of issues over the years. I don't go 1 year without having some complications or invasive tests. I've had every test going that you can think of. I had another bowel obstruction in 2014 when I was persuaded to try and eat some food, and I had some rice and I had some very bad bowel pain, and then the next day I had some more rice, and then the third day I had a little bit more rice, and I ended up with a bowel obstruction. And also in 2015 I had a very severe bowel obstruction. I enrolled onto this new professor's world's first MRI scan, functional MRI scan, where they scanned my intestines live. I was on a research trial where it was a double-blinded trial where the doctors were blinded and the patient was blinded. I had to drink 2 liters of this fibrous liquid, and I was injected with either neostigmine or saline, and like I said, the neostigmine to make the bowel work again. I was injected with the neostigmine in a line, and then they scanned my bowel live and they could see it, my bowel contracting. And when I got home I had severe bowel pain, but I managed to pass the liquid through. Then a week later I went back. Remember, we're all double blinded, so no one knows if it's saline or the neostigmine drug. The second time I had the saline injected into me, but then when I got home I had a severe bowel obstruction because I couldn't move the fibrous liquid through my bowels, and I had to get admitted to hospital. Also, my downstairs workings, you know what I mean, stopped working. I had lost all control of my ability with that. So then it brings us to 2022. So 2022, I decided that the Metoclopramide, the Reglan, was causing me so many neurological and psychological side effects. And I started to do some research on it because I was feeling so down and so confused, and my eyes weren't working properly. They were tremoring. I had tremors, my feet tremor, hand tremors. I was losing strength, just problems all downstairs, if you know what I mean. All kinds of problems. And I suddenly saw that you could only be on this drug for 5 days, and I'd been on it on the highest dose for nine years. I then decided to try and wean off it. The first attempt in 2022, I got to 3 weeks, and then I had serotonin toxicity or serotonin syndrome. Because I had my dopamine and my serotonin blocked for 9 years, the receptors, serotonin and dopamine receptors in my brain had died off. And so as I tried to wean off slightly off this drug, my dopamine and serotonin were going astronomically, abnormally high, and my receptors couldn't get the dopamine and serotonin out of my brain through different parts of my brain throughout my body. So as I started to lose ability to walk and started going out of my mind, I managed to take an overdose of the Metoclopramide to try and reverse the problem and try and get my dopamine and serotonin back down to switch it off. I spent about 20 hours in my bed going out of my mind. I tried to go to the toilet at one point, but I couldn't walk. I couldn't control my body. I was hysterically crying. I was thrashing around. I had uncontrollable movements, and I was extremely scared. But I wasn't scared of anything because I should have called an ambulance, but I couldn't because I didn't really know where I was or what I was doing, because my dopamine and serotonin was so high. I was completely out of my mind. But because I overdosed on the Metoclopramide, it gradually over 20 hours got me out of that problem from going into a coma, because when you have serotonin toxicity you can quite easily go into a coma. And so that was the first attempt. Then the second attempt, I went to a neurologist, and he didn't really know anything about it or what to do. In fact, no one knew what to do. I wrote to various societies, consultant societies. Psychiatrists didn't know what to do. So I tried this plan again with the neurologist, and that wasn't working. I got extremely ill with dopamine. It's called dopamine supersensitivity. It's where your brain is so super sensitive to any dopamine that you're off your tits basically. You're just extremely suicidal. All you want to do is you want to kill yourself, but you don't know why, but you just want to kill yourself, or you want to other people, and you can't stop moving your body, and your eyeballs roll around in your head, and you can't sleep, and you've got severe insomnia. You get very emotional. You just go mental. You just have a physiological and psychological breakdown. So it basically, we had to try for a third time, and it took me 20 months to come off this metoclopramide, and it was one of the worst things I've ever done. I spent 20 months on my own in my house, not seeing anybody, not doing anything. I tried to go to the gym very late at night. I shouldn't have been driving. I would drive up the pavement, up the curb, and I tried to do a bit of training, but the 24-hour migraines were so intense, and the body pains from this dopamine supersensitivity so intense. I was riddled with constant pain. I was on the full amount of codeine, and I got a bowel obstruction because the codeine bunged me up, but the codeine wasn't working. I was on a drug called duloxetine to try and boost my adrenaline, to try and reduce my pain, but that wasn't working. I was on Diazepam, so Valium. I was then given the full dose of Diazepam, so 30 milligrams a day. Anyone that knows anything about Diazepam knows that 30 milligrams a day for a year and a half, 2 years is unheard of. So I was on that. I was on an anti-psychotic. I was on sleeping tablets because I couldn't sleep. I was so crazy from the dopamine sensitivity for 20 months. It was horrendous, and I had no one to help me. I should have been in the mental ward, but no psychiatrist knew what to do. I had no help from my professor. He didn't know what to do. In fact, I then got banned from University College London Hospital gastroenterology department because they didn't know what to do, and I was trying to get them to help me, and they wouldn't help me. They weren't taking any responsibility. So I eventually got off the metoclopramide, weaned off it extremely slowly in September 2023, and now I've got the task of weaning off the Diazepam, which is probably going to take a year because I've been on such a mega dose of that. So I'm full of sedatives. I sleep all the time. I got to then wean off the antipsychotics, but the point is you just can't stop all these drugs cold turkey. Because I'm on such a huge amount of psychiatric drugs, I have to come off them very, very slowly. And then after that, it will be the sleeping tablets, but it's going to take a long time. That brings us to now, which I have basically pain all the time. I recently tried some powdered oats, 20 grams. I thought I was going to have to go to hospital. I had severe bowel pain all morning, all day. I had it in my orange juice all day, all morning, all night. And so I can't, that was a bit of a blow because I get so hungry not eating any food. So some take-home messages. Basically, when you're in pain, you've got to be patient, and you've got to accept the journey that you're on and the process that you're on, and you've got to accept yourself. When you're in pain, you can exacerbate your pain psychologically and sociologically. That's called the biopsychosocial model of pain. You have the biological side of pain, and then you have the psychological pain, so like catastrophizing, worrying about the pain, having negative thoughts. That type of thing is psychological, and that can manifest itself in pain and make the pain worse. And then you have the sociological side of pain, where how you relate to friends, family, and your social group, and that can have an effect on pain. But if you accept pain and you know that what you can do is exercise and still train even when you're in pain, and realize to yourself that you're not going to make yourself worse, you're going to make yourself better. For example, research has shown that heroin addicts, when they recover from being a heroin addict, exercise has shown to help them for their dopamine receptors in their brain to recover 14% faster if they do exercise and they just take medication. Well, me weaning off the metoclopramide is 100 times worse than weaning off heroin, because you can wean off heroin quite quickly, and heroin is a lifestyle drug, whereas this wasn't. I didn't choose to be on metoclopramide. It was given to me under false pretenses, and also the side effects were much more severe, and I had to take larger amounts of psychiatric medication to help me through it. But if you can train when you're in pain, and when I was training, my dopamine and serotonin would go up, which would make my headaches and my body pain even worse. But I wasn't doing. It's important to realize you're not doing yourself damage. You're encouraging your body to get used to pain and heal itself mentally, physically, and you go into pain, into the pain threshold. When you've got pain, when you train with pain, you enlarge in your comfort zone. When you start going, oh, I've got pain, I shouldn't do this, and then you rest or you stop, and then you go, well, I'll do a bit of exercise, and then you have pain, and then you stop again, and then you carry on, and before you know it, you're in bed 24 hours a day, not doing anything, wanting to be suicidal and depressed and everything like that. So you've got to go push yourself into pain, like a 6 or 7 out of 10 pain, and then back off out of 10 pain, and back off, and keep pushing into pain, and it enlarges your comfort zone. It enlarges your mental ability to deal with adversity and setbacks and drawbacks, and it makes you more mentally resilient and tough. You've got to know that the exercise boosts your immune system, increases your dopamine and serotonin receptors, enhances your central nervous system, and also makes your muscles stronger. And like I said earlier, it's better to be strong and in pain than weak and in pain. The other thing is, when you're going through adversity, don't take your problems, your physical problems, your pain, your mental problems, or your frustrations out on other people. Don't project them to other people. That makes you a bitter and twisted person. Now, I know it's very easy to put your problems onto other people when you go through terrible things in your life, but you've got to divert those negative problems into something positive, like exercising or weight training or running, or something that takes, and start off very slowly and build up very gradually, bit by bit. So it's like exposure therapy. You're exposing yourself to more adversity in order to get over adversity and channel your negative things that happen in your life into a more positive thing. So really important not to become bitter and twisted and become depressed and put that onto others. The other thing I would say is, when you have adversity in your life, try to think about problem solving and action planning. And this is what I do a lot of with people with my Fat Loss SOS course. It's all about problem solving and finding a better solution to a problematic or triggering situation or environment that you're in. So take a step back, think about the problems that you have in your life, what you can do to solve those problems. Forget the regression therapy, forget the looking back into your childhood and trying to think, oh, I've got this problem because of that happened in my childhood on that day at that specific time. That's BS. Life doesn't work like that. We're not pigeonholed into certain areas. There's many things that happen to people in life that cause a variety of problems, but some things are out of people's control. Like me, for example, I was born with my problems. I had no say in them. But what I do is I problem solve, and I write action plans, and I try and meet those plans, and I try and reflect on my attitude and how I can have better attitudes towards others, towards myself, and how I can grieve my personal losses. Because when you're ill or you're injured or you're going through pain, you do grieve. It's a grieving process. And you've got to work through the grieving steps of the things that you lose, or the things that you wanted to gain in life that you can't always do because you've got a problem. The other take-home message is self-identity, and this is another thing that I teach on my mentoring Fat Loss SOS course. When people are trying to lose fat for life, they identify as a fat person, and what you've got to do is reevaluate your goals, your habits, your lifestyle, your behavior, and your self-identity, and you have to change your self-identity so you become a different person. And what I mean by that is, quite literally, the old you has to die. It has to die off, and you have to form a new self-identity. When you're ill, going through adversity, or you're in pain, or you have an injury, I work with lots of people with injuries. One of my expertise is musculoskeletal injuries. I rehab people from all different parts of England and London and different people around the world. It's about changing your identity, because when you have an injury for a certain period of time, or an illness, or some setback or depression, it becomes your identity, and you've got to try your absolute best to not make it your self-identity. You've got to disentangle and disconnect your illness or your injury or your mental health problems from your identity. You have to do things that counteract that, so that you form a new identity and you form a new person, and you go off on another tangent. So, for example, you exercise, you go running, or you do weight training, or you do something. So one of the best things for depression, for example, is something physical that is slightly dangerous, that takes your mind off reminiscing back in the past, and it takes your mind to the current state. And if you don't think about the current state, you'll get injured. Let's take squats, for example. If you're doing a heavy set of 5 squats, you must focus on that. If you start ruminating about your past, and that's basically what depression is, you can't do the two things at the same time. You have to change your identity and focus on, I'm now a person that focuses on things in the present and looks to targets and attaining actuals, targets versus actuals of performance psychologically and mentally in the future, and that becomes your identity. Same with pain. Instead of focusing on the pain or the pain that you've gone through, you have to focus on a new identity and think about what you can do now to change your circumstances for the better. And that normally involves doing something challenging and slightly dangerous, like a type of sport, or sprinting, or weight training, or some people prefer long distance slow running, to take your mind to the present and look to the future. And that comes back to action planning and planning targets, and then making those targets habits, and then those habits attached to the actuals. So it's targets versus actuals, and then attaining the actuals, and then living those new habits that you form that are more positive. And when I say positive, I don't mean just positivity like people talk about. That's the other take-home message. When you're positive, you've got to be realistically positive. You can't say, people say, oh, you've got to be positive. No, you've got to be realistically positive. You can't say, someone can't say, hey, Fred, go and jump over that cliff, you'll be fine, and you go, yeah, I'll be fine. That's positivity. Realistic positivity is knowing where you stand, what you can do, and how you can move forward in a positive way. That is realistic positivity. And that's another important thing that you need to focus on when you're in pain, adversity, got mental health problems, or you're injured. You need to think about how you can be realistically positive and take little baby steps and keep moving forward all the time. So there you go. That's why I haven't eaten for 15 years pretty much. And it's a pain in the ass, and it's horrendous, and I've been through horrendous things that would have finished off or killed most people, but I keep moving forward. Through all that, I've been British Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu champion three times, open weight champion once. I think I came second at London open weight. I can't remember. Wrestling, I've done very well in this country, because I've always attached my identity to something that is not me, and I don't attach myself to my illness. And it's a lifelong illness, and it's not going to get any better. And the option is I carry on doing what I'm doing, or I have a venting tube where I vent out lots of trapped air, or I have a feeding tube, but then I'll be attached to a bag. It'll be the same as my medical drinks, but I'll be attached to a bag 12 hours a day, and I'll have a tube coming out of my intestine. But at the moment, I'm trying to push on with drinking liquids and trying to train through a lot of pain. Yeah, thanks for listening, and ask me any questions in the comments, and share your thoughts and your feelings, and also any adversities you've been through in the comments. Have a good day, and I'll speak to you later.